Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Good Citizens of Robotics Research Workshop. I'm Mustafa Mukadam. I'm a researcher at Facebook AI, and I'm joined by my co-organizers, Nima and Nico. If you would like to quickly introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Nima Fazali. I'm with the University of Michigan, an assistant professor.
And hi, I'm Nico Sinderhoff. I'm a senior lecturer at Queensland University of Technology in Brisbane, Australia.
So we'll get started with our panel session. We have three panelists with us, Danica, Peter, and Anka, and also a guest panelist, Sid. What we'll do is we'll go around and have each panelist introduce themselves, briefly summarize what their talk was about and some key takeaways, and then we'll start with the first question and get the discussion going. So Danica?
Yeah, so my name is Dani, and I'm professor at KTH in Stockholm, Sweden. And my talk was a little bit about my own experience of how to build an academic career, do's and don'ts, and basically that we can't have a single model of everybody building the career in the same way. Yeah, that was basically the summary.
Peter?
Hi, I'm Peter. I'm a professor of robotics at QUT in Brisbane, same place as Nico. My talk was inspired by some time directing a bunch of computer vision and robotics people and observing that they think about their research very differently. And I think that the computer vision people use a methodology of evaluation of systems very, very effectively. And we purport to do experiments. And I don't think we do experiments very well. So I was just trying to highlight the differences and the benefits of this evaluation methodology versus an experimental methodology. But when it comes to experimental methodology, I bow at the altar of Anka, who gave a very nice talk about experiments and what they mean.
Yeah, so I guess on that note, I'm Anka from UC Berkeley. And I wanted to share a bit on what I've learned about experiment design. And kind of as a background, I didn't really know much about this, but then I started through becoming part of the human-robot interaction community where they take experimental design very rigorously. And so as part of that, I had to learn a lot of things. And it turns out that some of those things are very much applicable to the way we should maybe think about experiment design in robotics when we're trying to do algorithmic work that has nothing to do necessarily directly with robots interacting with people. So in my talk, I was trying to outline some principles and some things to watch out for really as we're setting up our experiments that are really about evaluating the algorithms.
And finally, our guest panelist, Sid.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sid. I'm in sunny Seattle at the University of Washington. I'm sitting in my kids' playroom. I really enjoyed all the presentations, and I'm just here to crash this panel and ask some questions, maybe.
Okay, so let's get started with the first question. So this is related to opportunities. So in academia, there are many opportunities that arise, right? Collaboration, industry projects, ideas, community, university roles. How do you each decide what to take on and what to say no to? How do you assess opportunity cost in that context? Do you have examples for situations where you had to make a hard decision about turning something down?
I'm very bad at turning things down. Nearly getting toward the end of my career, and I'm still rubbish at turning things down. I guess that's the fear of missing out, that this opportunity might be a really big one. Actually, I don't need more things. I don't know why I do it.
So I applied the Marie Kondo principle. I don't know much about Kondo. Yeah, I don't know much about Kondo because I'm really not a clean, orderly person. So I tried to watch half an episode and gave up. But it has this thing of keep the things that spark joy. And I think that, when it comes to research projects, you keep the things that spark joy. And then when it comes to these engagements, right, these opportunities, is if something feels like, oh, I'm really excited about this and the world would be better, or I would feel happier, or whatever reason it is, then do it. But if it feels kind of daunting and like it wouldn't bring you joy, then maybe don't do it.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that I'm kind of like much more practical and maybe even strategic. So early in my career, I would not dare to say no to many things. And I was really maximizing everything that you mentioned in the beginning, like the collaborations and projects and everything. I've done everything I could have done basically to collect all the points I needed basically for my tenure. But then I think that after I became a full professor, and that was like 7 years, I think, after getting my PhD, so I was a little bit kind of like saying yes to too many things in the beginning, I suppose. Then I realized, oh God, no, there is nothing more to get. Like I'm going to go for 30 more years just doing this. No, and then I started to think, okay, more in what Peter and Anka said. I mean, what is interesting and what is relevant also of doing. And also trying to be fair by not saying yes to too many things, because as soon as I know, as I say yes to yet another thing, I will have less time for those things that I already said yes to. Mm. So the fear of missing out, I think that we can't heal that, is always there, no matter how academically, what our academic age is. But I think that one of the things I said in my presentation was about balancing. So, you know, just deciding what kind of role you would like to have for the next coming 5 years. Do you want to do research? Do you want to do mentoring, supervision? Do you maybe want to take some form of an academic leadership position? And it's maybe not always easy to decide when to do that, but at least you can plan a little bit ahead of you. What is relevant for the next step in my career? Do I want to do more research? Do I want to do more leadership? And just basically use that as guidance.
I can take a stab at it too. I say no to everything.
Oh, this is quite a range of different answers.
Particularly talks and panels, but
as evident.
as is evident from this one, yes. But I only say yes to things that only I can do and nobody else can. And if there's other people who can do it, then they're much better people than me to do that. I think it's if there was anything that I would teleport back in time and tell my younger self, it would be that like none of this actually matters, and you should just work on the things that either spark joy or create impact or really think intrinsically about who you want to be. But I think you know, we've all been burnt by saying yes to too many things, and so at some point I was just like, no, I'm just going to say no to everything and then see what happens.
So Sid, if somebody had said to you, only do things that have impact, what would you have done differently?
Oh, see, now I have to like pull out all the dirty laundry about all the crap work that I had to do that I wish I hadn't done. I would say yes to everything that Peter Cork asked me to do because it is fundamentally, by definition, impactful. Like, I mean, come on. He says yes to everything.
I wish somebody had taken me aside and said, Peter, you're a senior person now, you should do less things. That would have been very helpful to me, but it never happened.
Yeah, I think I agree with Danishka in that, like, it's a zero-sum game, right? Like you can only work so many hours. And so at some point you're either missing out on hanging out with your kids or missing out on running or playing something. So just figuring out what matters and what doesn't. It's I think we often forget that these opportunities just keep coming by. You know this. Yeah. You just have to have the foresight to believe that that's true, that you will be successful and these things will happen again.
We have a question that is related a little bit to like group culture and how you manage the people you're working with, especially sort of the junior academics or postdocs. And the premise is that research is highly competitive. We always submit to conferences, things get reviewed, maybe rejected, and we have the fear of being scooped or overtaken. Can you share a few insights how you address maybe mental health issues or stress or disappointment in your group? Do you normalize failure or rejection in some kind to help people overcome these lows and then be able to celebrate the successes later again?
I like to give them the example of me after my first year of PhD, after 3 rejections, wanting to drop out, you know, and I almost did. I was like, I don't know anything about robotics. I mean, I still don't, but I knew even less then. And I thought, oh, I'm just not really cut out to do this. And then I almost dropped out because, you know, I like to tell them about all the times that I sucked and I still suck, because I think it makes, you know, it makes them realize that they don't have to be perfect. So that's important. I also think that it's important for people to have conversations about stuff like this and expectations, especially now. So during the pandemic, I think that groups have evolved in some students felt even more kind of pressure to deliver things because now everyone's at home. So now there's no distraction. So you can just, you know, and I had to kind of sit down with my students and say, look, just to be clear, I don't expect you to be more productive now. I don't even expect you to be as productive now. Like, please take the time you need to process everything that's going on around. There's a new fire out every day, right? So the world is a distracting place. And I think that it's important to let people know that it's okay to feel the way that they feel, and that they should take care of themselves first.
Danny?
Yeah, I talked a bit about that in my presentation too. I think I mean, this kind of like interpersonal, you know, intercultural and things like that. I mean, none of us is really trained for that. That's the bottom line. I mean, we don't get the training to work with people. And I think that that's the important starting point for me. So many of the things I said yes during my career was to actually educate myself how is to work with people that are both younger and more senior to me. How do we find a language to talk to when we have different objectives to optimize in our careers and things like that, but also to understand better people that come from different cultures that are trained in countries that have maybe different educational styles and things like that. So what is the expectation of the student in terms of mentorship, guidance, and things like that? And I think that that has been a challenge because I by nature really like people and want to understand them as individuals. And one of the fears or one of the problems I think that has also generated is that in many cases I have acted as a mom. I wanted to understand everybody, why they are stressed. I wanted to make it easier for them. No, you don't need to take this conference deadline. There will be more conference deadlines. Oh no, let me write your paper. I know it's a challenging thing. And you know, after some time, I don't know whether I got older or got like when I got my own kids and things like that, I realized that I was actually not doing them a good favor because this was not the treatment I got from my supervisor. Really hard on me. And I think that that was really good. Still, I'm still learning. But what I think is important, as Anka has said, it's important to be very open about things. So that I have a child with special needs that needs attention 24 hours a day. And that's the first thing I say to people when I interview them and offer them a position. They need to know about my family situation. And I usually say, when I'm really stressed, I go shoe shopping. That I have like 400 pairs of shoes at home. What do you do when you're stressed? Yeah, I know I'm getting rid of some. Anyway, so I think that what is important is to also dare to be a bit personal, because this is how people also kind of like, you know, then share potentially problems that they have and so on, and have easier time also to discuss with you how to deal with stress. But again, finding the right balance of how to still be productive and being yourself. I think that's something that needs trained. Yeah, and I usually say to people, if you don't know how to deal with these interpersonal relations, I think it's important to take a course. We have lots of courses at KTH that students can also take in order to understand how to work with people, how to supervise, how to mentor, how to be critical in a constructive way, and so on. It doesn't come naturally to anybody. This is what I want to say. I think that we should everybody be trained for actually supervising.
I think that's the hardest part of your job, is dealing with human beings. And you're right, we're not trained in that. And I guess we all kind of muddle through. For me, the big dilemma is, you want to have a group that's high performing. So you want to encourage people to strive, to aspire, and that's got to involve some amount of stress. But you don't want to break them. And I know I've been guilty in the past of pushing people too hard and breaking them. That's not good. I think I've got better at that. Nico can probably comment better, but not when I'm here. So yeah, I think that's the dilemma. Do you have a group where everyone's really happy and comfortable, but not actually doing anything, or the opposite, where they're all stressed and pumping out papers, but their mental health is very bad? I think you have to be, as a boss, I think you have to be accessible as much as you can. On top of everything else, the number of people who come to my door and say, can I talk to you for a minute? They always ask for a minute, and they always stay for 10, right? But you can't tell them to go away because you're busy, right? So that sends a really bad message. So I think you have to try, despite all the stuff that's sort of piled up on your computer, yeah, you have to make that time. And there will be particular students who you can tell are not taking rejections well, and you need to put in extra time to talk them through that. We're the most criticized profession. I mean, by the people who assess our grants and assess papers, we are continually attacked by anonymous people. I don't think there's any other profession like it. It's very odd.
That's true.
Sid, do you have want to share your opinion?
I think those are all really empathetic words from everyone. I have very little to add, other than I think part of our profession is to solve people's problems. And so we start off every conversation with, at least this has been my fault in the past, like, oh, let me tell you how to solve your problem. Whereas mostly I think we just need to understand and listen. And I think everything that they've said about listening is all the more valid. I must also admit, I have a lot to learn about being empathetic, for sure. I think we sometimes forget that everyone is different, and you got to just make sure that you understand people better. I agree with Dani also, is that once you have kids, it's unfortunate, but once you have kids, you get a different perspective of life. And then now that I'm old, I have an even different perspective. So I think I wish, again, I could teleport myself back in time and fix some things.
I think Sid's comment about solutions is important. I think as a male and as an engineer, we always lead. We tend to lead with solutions and not with listening. It takes a lot of untraining to try and listen.
I have to say that we do this SWOT analysis. And I did one very early in my career before I became a full professor. It was part of the training that I needed to do for getting a full professor. And it was then I understood that I was not a good listener. That was back in 2006. So since then, I'm really forcing myself not to interrupt people and really give them time to. And it's always like, you have only, as Peter said, I gave you already 1 minute. It's ticking. And I'm really trying just to forget about that time is passing and bite my tongue many times. And I think that has resulted in, I would say, more open conversations in the group, people daring to say things, but also have that very difficult 1 minute of silence when nobody says anything. and you are not always the first that breaks the silence. So I think that conducting conversations with silent moments is actually something that everybody would need to kind of train to feel comfortable with.
Scary.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
Maybe just to finish that thought a little bit before Nima gets us into a more technical question, I guess. Do you guys think if you actually need some form of structure in the academic life that actually enforces, these ideas that you guys are talking about, sort of more inspired from an industry where students maybe give upward feedback to their advisors and it's a really two-way communication? Or do you think that you don't really need that structure? It's, good advisors will be great and they'll just, make time to do that.
I think mechanisms always trump best intentions. You must have mechanisms, ways by which you can actually measure and hold people accountable for what they're doing.
Absolutely, and I just sorry,
you
go Peter. No, I just want.
Depends on the. I think it depends on group size. Small groups, it's easy to muddle by. As it gets bigger, then I think mechanisms are important. Danny.
Thank you, Peter. And I wanted to say that, we change students on regular basis, right? So what maybe worked for one set of people will not work for the next set of people because they're just new people and different. So I think that it's this kind of constant adaptation that one needs to do and not just apply the old model that worked for another group. So and that I think is also quite difficult to train, that you need to be a different type of a leader every potentially 4 years or every 5 years or something like that.
I think part of the structure that's missing that's very related to what Dani was saying. I think you have to customize to every single student. What works for one student doesn't work for another. They need different things from you and you have to be whatever they need. But the hard part is that, you don't, there's nothing that teaches you that. You kind of, you learn from your advisor and then you pass some things on to your students and you fail again and you suck in this way and that way. And over time you get better. And in industry, you actually you don't become a manager without, you actually have to take training and listen to people who have thought about that and who have had experience in that. The fact that we don't have this in academia has always been a bit jarring because such a big part of our lives is essentially this relationship we have, this mentoring relationship we have with our PhD students especially. And then of course, there's also the teaching side. And it's very weird that we, assume that if someone did good research in their PhD, they're going to be a great advisor. It just does not seem true at all. So perhaps we should do something to train people and have them amass some knowledge at least that we can pass on a little bit so that not everyone has to rediscover something every time.
Awesome. So this is a slightly different topic. It's about competitions such as RoboCup, the DARPA Robotics Challenges, the Amazon Robotics Challenges. And the question basically asks, since these are challenges in which whole systems are evaluated, it's very hard to isolate confounding factors. So then the question is, what is the value of these challenges for our community and what can we learn from them? Given that you're designing an entire system for a specific task, maybe different people come with different solutions or something like that. So what do we actually take away from these?
Is this a reaction to me insisting that we have to control for confounds in experiment design? Well, I don't think that a competition like the DARPA Robotics Challenge is, something that's running an experiment. I think that it serves a very different purpose, which is to drive the technology forward, right? To demonstrate capability in some way or another, to bring some tasks that people weren't focusing on before. And I would assume that side by side, along with that or after that, comes the more sort of, or before that ideally, but it's never time before, comes the more rigorous, scientific analysis of what actual are design choices that make sense, what are algorithmic choices that make sense. And that's when you think about, all the stuff that I was talking about with controlling for confounds. I wouldn't put the burden on the competitions. I think they're useful. They're not useful in this teasing out a particular scientific principle necessarily. I think that comes from working towards those tasks, but they provide the tasks.
Danny.
Thank you, Peter. No, I think that for my group, we've been to on picking challenge twice. It was good for the group spirit in a way, for everybody to work under pressure and get closer to each other in a way, because they were not competing in the same way. They were really, really collaborating. And then I think that the value is also outside our community. I mean, we need to somehow show what what we can do collectively in a way, how to demonstrate, for example, technology and so on. And I think that, and research that we are developing. So I think that it has value outside the community. And then, of course, it's valuable for students in a way to get access to systems and frameworks that can learn how to use later on in their career. Peter.
Thank you. I think it is very good for the team spirit, but I think these things are sprints, right? I think that generally not much new science is going to come out of it, because you're going to make decisions to go with stuff that you know that you're familiar with, that you can grab off the shelf and integrate. So I think it's it's a triumph of systems engineering, but not done with any systems engineering methodology. If I observe many competition teams, it's done probably with far more effort than it should take. I think it is in some ways an evaluation. You can look at two systems to do a task, and you can say this one did better than that one. The competition rules are effectively a performance metric, but there are so many confounding variables that you could say, okay, this one was first in the Amazon robotic challenge, this one was second, and each team may attribute particular aspects of their system to their success or lack of success, but you can never tell that was actually the factor. So very valuable, but very tiring, very exhausting, and we shouldn't do them too often, because I think they do damage to the students. I've had some students from our Amazon Robotics Challenge team withdrew from PhD program afterwards. I think they were just kind of burned out. So that's not a good outcome.
Anka, do you think that the computer vision and machine learning community are better at designing experiments than we are in robotics? Peter talked a little bit about what we can learn maybe from their side. What do you think?
And there's some things to be learned. I mean, they're better in some senses, perhaps in that they have established these benchmarks that everyone's chasing. So everyone's very clear about what the metric is. But unfortunately, sometimes those metrics are, there's a thing called Goodhart's law that I'm very into for the past few years, which is whenever you set a metric, it no longer becomes something you actually want to optimize for, right? Because every metric is going to end up being gamed. And so I feel like, so anyway, so I think that there's values and compromises to be done there. But in terms of the actual experimental design, it really depends sort of paper to paper. Some people do a really good job identifying these different factors, and some people, resort to, well, there was this paper that was a baseline, and I'm not gonna, really investigate what it is that I brought to the table and whether the thing that I'm saying is the thing that makes it better is actually the thing that makes it better. Instead, I'm just gonna compare to this baseline, and I got 98 and you got 96, and we're done, right? Maybe I sometimes report some error bars, but not always. So I think it really depends paper to paper. And then there are papers that do really good ablation. So this is something that happens in machine learning. That's not quite the full factorial design, but you kind of remove one thing at a time. And it's a proxy, right? It's not as good as the full factorial, but like I was saying in my talk, the full factorial is often very difficult to strive for. So they kind of make a conscious choice of sort of, breaking things down until and removing things bit by bit to show that everyone actually contributes something. So that's something that I see more done in ML and computer vision than, I should say mostly ML, because I don't read that much of computer vision literature. yeah, it's more done in ML than in robotics. But yeah, I think that would be one thing, but I wouldn't really say that, I don't know, experimental design is hard for everyone.
Does anyone have final thoughts before we close up this panel?
As I said in the beginning, this was a fantastic initiative. So please,
Absolutely.
guys, if you have the energy, please continue with it, because I think it's relevant for the community.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's awesome.
Thank
All right,
you.
so maybe that's a good point to transition to our next panel. Do we have everyone here? And also our previous panelists, please feel free to stick around if you have any questions.
In any case, thank you very much for joining us. Yeah.
Good to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you.
Thanks, Peter.
So let's get started with our next panel. We have, again, 3 speakers, 3 panelists, and also a surprise guest panelist. So we have Sue, we have Murphy, and then of course Sid again, and then Dimitri as our guest panelist. So we'll go around again, have each of you introduce yourself, maybe talk a little bit about what your presentation was, and then we'll get started with some questions. Sue?
Yeah, thanks, Mustafa. My name's Sue Kay. I'm the Research Director for Cyber Physical Systems with CSIRO's Data 61. We have a team in the DARPA Subterranean Challenge, if you haven't heard of us before. That's part of the National Science Agency here in Australia. And I did a presentation on why should anyone care about robotics. And that's because in thinking about the workshop that you've put together here today and what good citizens of robotics research should look like, it made me think about how we define the robotics community. And I think we probably all do that quite differently. And so my presentation was really just to challenge us about how we consider who is part of the robotics community and how we engage with them about why robotics research is important.
Robin.
Well, howdy, I'm Robin Murphy. I'm a professor of computer science and engineering at Texas A&M, and I specialize in disaster robots. I tell people I've been in 29 disasters, not of my own making. So I've had experience and been working in the field since 1995. And I hope in my talk I was able to convey the wonderful opportunities to get people involved, but also some of the things we need to think about that's not obvious and never come up in our classes or our apprenticeships.
Sid?
Hello, everyone. I'm Sid. I'm a professor at the University of Washington. It's nice and sunny out here. I'm in my kids' playroom. I build robots, just like others. I talked about a question, which is, what should I work on? What should anybody work on? And shared some thoughts on what I think people should be thinking about when they're thinking about the question of what they should work on.
Dimitri?
Yeah, hi, I'm Dimitri from University of Michigan. I work on manipulation, motion planning, and I'm happy to be a surprise guest today.
Actually, that's a good segue with maybe if you want to get started with your question first.
My question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, well, I guess I had the question that came up after watching Sid's talk. Sid, as my advisor, I'm perpetually watching your talks. So, yeah, and it was about this kind of idea of why we do robotics or what problems we should study and kind of what motivates us. And towards the end of your talk, you had this kind of nice model of the mercenary and the monarch, right? And I believe you said something like the mercenary seeks reward, right? And the monarch seeks power. Is that correct, more or less? Okay,
yeah.
Good. I got that. And I just wanted to ask, like, obviously, people have many different motivations, right? And Some people seek power, some people seek reward, some people seek a better world, some people seek curiosity, understanding nature, all of these things. Why highlight that dynamic of the power versus the reward? Because to me, both of those are kind of greedy motivations, right? They're all about my personal gain. And there may be people out there who have kind of more altruistic motivations. And how can they fit into that framework?
Yeah, thank you. And always embarrassing that my students are watching my talks now, but I hope I wasn't too disappointing. So there, I think a couple of things. Of course, there's like numerous ways of slicing this pie. You can look at Maslow's hierarchy. You can look at various other ways that people have thought about, intrinsic motivation for doing the things that we're doing. I was mostly addressing the humans that I encountered. I think it's largely about knowing who you are. And I think like, I would also, maybe it was poor framing on my part that I didn't mean reward to mean sort of greedy reward. I would, this might sound heretical, I would call Mother Teresa a mercenary, in that she was very mercenary in her desire to want to go and get stuff done and make sure that people's lives were better. I think maybe it is more in the, do you want to go and do it yourself, or do you want to get others to go do it for you? And I think that phrasing might have been better that way. And honestly, I think the biggest misconceptions, like intrinsic misconceptions that I've noticed, are monarchs who think they're mercenaries. And this happens more often than you can imagine. And then they sort of fail in the heat of battle. But yeah, point well taken. I think I should be formulating that dichotomy a little bit more. Also, I wanted to be very deliberately provocative in that statement, because I wanted you to think and ask me these questions.
Yeah. Thanks for that response. I mean, I would just kind of add to that somebody like Darwin or Einstein or something, you could probably fit them in one category or another, because again, everybody has motivations in that dimension, but that's not why they did what they did, right? That may not be their primary motivation. And when we have kind of young graduate students who are kind of groping around trying to find, what to work on and why they're doing this and whatever, I think it's important to also throw into the mix of motivations the fact that, hey, we do it because we just want to do it, right? I mean, you could call it an intrinsic motivation, not dependent so much on external reward. That like we want to make robots work because we want to see them work. It's not really about so much the personal gain. It's more about the act of doing it. And so also the act of exploration and curiosity as well.
So that connects a little bit to what you said in your talk, right? But where you said you don't like when people just say, oh, we do that because it's cool, right? You wanted to see the bigger picture a little bit in the motivation, is that right?
So Sue had a question.
Yes, I guess that builds off what Nico was just saying, and that is, how often perhaps some of our research is guided by what's cool or, what hasn't been discovered yet. And I thought, Robin, in your presentation, you did a really good job of showing, why, particularly in a disaster response scenario, that really doesn't cut it. And being able to rock up there with something that you think's really cool is not necessarily very helpful. But it made me think, because one of the observations, that was made in a study that was done a while ago with social robots was where I think there's still a very low level of understanding of what robotic capabilities are in general. And so you put in this example, a social robot was put in a hospital. And there was a lot of concern by the hospital staff about what this was and why it was there. But after some time of them getting used to it, they then actually came up with ideas of what the robot could do as they started to understand its capabilities. And I guess my question for you is, how can we get that balance between allowing people to see enough of robots without being annoying and just saying, well, this is really cool, can you use this? But also giving the people who need to use those tools some idea of what the capabilities are so that they can probably come up with use cases that we would never dream of. Because, I really took on board, your comment about, just trying to, throw a hammer at everything when it's not necessarily needed. But I think there is also a balance there of how we can do a better job of letting people know what robot capabilities are and then allowing them to let us know what we can do about it.
Okay, it looks like we froze.
Go ahead.
So we froze there at the end, but I think I got the gist of the question. So Sue, absolutely, we want them to see that. So we see it, there's a couple of ways to answer your question. First off is what I hope one of the big takeaways is that you got to work with the end users. You've got to partner. We've got to work with them side by side so they can see and trust us. And that doesn't happen during the immediate response phase. Now with COVID, we've got an excellent opportunity, as with every other disaster, is after the disaster, people are a little, I'm tired, but I want to try new things. And that moment of opportunity to form those partnerships, to show them what can be done, but not so much tell them, to say, listen, and let's work. I think people like Chris Hauser, who started working in pandemics after the Ebola outbreak and working side by side with doctors. Bill Smart did some work with Robotics Without Borders. We're seeing that now. Andrea Tomas has done some great work, and she actually has a company that was able to get robots in because they were already there. They were being used, the month before it really hit. So I think it's a matter of us playing our cards well and forming those partnerships. And I think with COVID, this is a unique opportunity because it's going to be long lasting. So we'll have time as between waves to make those partnerships.
Great. Nico?
Yeah, I want to ask you a question more broader to all of you, really. I think the research in robotics, and especially the outputs that we produce, have really a wide impact, right, on society, on the economy. There are lots of ethical questions, especially if we go all the way to maybe a sort of a utopia that might be a motivation for some of us, where robots are really everywhere. And the question is, I think we as researchers, roboticists, we are very good at driving the robotic capabilities forward, right? We can fix the technology, but we're not really good at fixing the arising ethical or societal or economic questions. So how do we make sure we don't have like this growing disparity between those things, and we take thinkers from these other fields with us? Or do you see that that's not even a problem at the moment?
I would like to answer that, or be one of the people to answer, is that we've just recently done an analysis of close to 300 articles about how robots are being used across 32 countries in the world for COVID. And 45 of those express concerns, ethical concerns. And a lot of those concerns simply come down, it's about 50-50. End users using them, not really thinking through the ramifications. But others were us as roboticists not thinking through the ramifications, our own responsibilities, things that if you just went back and looked at our, IEEE in ACM professional code of ethics, we'd probably go, yeah, that probably wasn't our best moment. So I think part of it is our own awareness, not just saying ethics is those policy wonks should do that. We need to start looking at it more seriously among ourselves.
Yeah, Nico, if I can jump in, I agree with Robin. I think that while it might seem very intimidating, trying to engage with politicians in particular. I think it really is quite crucial because, you know, I know in Australia here we have a real issue where there's limited funding, and quite a lot of the funding towards robotics is actually going towards what I call robotic consumption, not robotic creation. So it really doesn't help people who are in robotics research at all. And yet, from our politicians' perspective, if you were to go to them, they'd say, but we just funded robotics. And you're going, well, actually, you didn't fund robotics at all. And we expect them to have this, you know, quite nuanced understanding of what we do without actually talking to them about it, if that makes sense. And yet they are the people who actually have the power to make decisions that are going to influence what we do over the long term. So I think perhaps it's a matter of thinking about it strategically. I think we all tend to go into a reactive mode where you might get asked to talk at a school and do these other things, and you can feel really good that you're doing some outreach activities. But I really think we need to get to the point where we're actually being quite strategic about, well, is it actually anyone talking to our politicians and actually helping them understand what we do and why it's important? Because if we don't do that, then there is probably, you know, very good reasons why we don't get support for robotics research.
Sid, what do you think?
I don't have much to add. I think it was captured well. I think one thing I would say is most robots are garbage. They don't work. And it's important that we tell people that, particularly in times like this when people are vulnerable. So I think so often, I think we're very prescriptive and like, oh, you have a problem, I'll give you a robot. And then you have two problems. And so most of my time is spent telling people that they shouldn't be using robots. There's much easier ways of solving their problems. So I think part of it is sort of training ourselves to be a little less prescriptive and be a little bit more understanding of like why that technology is a good fit for the problem that exists. I think we're terrible at that.
Dimitri?
Yeah, I think it's easy to get lost in applications of robotics and forget about the fact that these applications are outgrowths of more fundamental capabilities. And while I'm in total agreement with Sid that most modern robots are totally useless outside of the factory, that's on us as researchers, right? They don't have the capabilities to be useful. And so to me, I think robotics is still at the phase where we have to work on those fundamental capabilities, perception, manipulation, machine learning, before we can start to reliably deploy things other than mobile robots. And so we need to focus there, in my opinion.
Great, thank you. And there's a very good follow-up question to this particular question that
That's on the application.
Maybe you're having some network problems.
We lost Dimitri.
Oh, I think it's on Dimitri's side. That was on my side. Oh,
Well, go ahead, Nima.
Sorry, yeah, whilst we have Dimitri coming back. A follow-up question to this question that came up was that, oh, sorry, yeah. So research papers are often taken and covered by media outlets, and titles like AI learned to do X or Y are prevalent and typically lead to a gap in public perception of the state of the art, right? And so as researchers, what role should we play in closing this gap and not feeding the hype cycle, or should we be feeding the hype cycle?
I have a quick, this is an anecdote from back in the day with Dimitri. We gave a press interview once, and then an article came out about how a robot was shooting laser beams out of its fingers to manipulate objects. So, you know, that was quite impressive. I wish that were true. I still aim to build a robot that can do that. That's my North Star. But certainly, yeah, I think there's two things, right? One is that, you know, oftentimes there is things that are lost in translation, and that's understandable. We try very hard to explain our work as clearly as possible to our audience, but sometimes they choose to represent it in some ways. I always edit any press article before it comes out, and I decline publishing it if it doesn't meet my edits. This is actually learning from the laser beam incident, which is deeply embarrassing and continues to be. I think there's a dual problem which you brought about of like, hey, should we be feeding the hype cycle? 10 years ago when I was younger, I would be all like upset and say, no, don't do that. Be a true academic. I'm older and more cynical now. I'm like, do what you want. In the end, the world will find out who you are. Of course, there may be a lot of damage caused before then, but I think, I think in our business particularly, the only currency that we have is our reputation. Nobody else cares about anything else. So if you want to damage your reputation, go for it.
Just to jump in, I mean, I think, to Sid's point that, there are a lot of limitations to the capability of robots, and we should be being very loud and clear about that whenever we're communicating with people. But I think the communicating with people is the key thing. And journalism and media, there are limitations to what you can do in that forum, but it is a way that a lot of people communicate. And I think sometimes we just have to wear the fact that messages are not going to come out in the way that we intend, and we're not necessarily going to be able to control that. I think that Sid has a good point where, if possible, if you can get the opportunity to edit, that's a really good thing. But I think any conversation you have with journalists and other people who are in the mainstream media is a great opportunity for education. And if you can get that message out there that perhaps robots aren't exactly as they are in the movies, but also try and reduce people's fear by explaining that they're quite limited in capability and aren't going to really be taking too many people's jobs soon, then that's a good opportunity to take.
And to follow up on that, though, please quit telling them any robot that's built is basically, what could it be used for? Search and rescue. So what happens is that you get crazy robot stuff. Then I get a call because all the emergency responders all over the world know me, and they explain to me, why are you, Robin, so stupid? How insulting it is that you think this will solve my problems. It's like, I don't even know them. And it's like, yes, but and particularly in the early days of search and rescue robots and rescue robotics in the 2000s, we saw a couple of robot programs are things that were right at the incipient of being adopted, and the responders walked away because of the press had so overstated somebody else's robot and their claims that they said we were just too pie in the sky, all of us were, to work with. And that's the downside of the press. The best part about press is this is how they see it. I mean, I've been in a couple of disasters where the robots were being used, not because that group knew us, but because they had seen it on television and knew other groups used it. So therefore, by God, we were going to use it too, which is great. But the reverse is true. So we need to be careful about both sides.
So we actually have a question in the live stream chat. And this also a little bit ties back to one of the discussion points in the previous panel. So I'll just try to summarize all of that. Basically, this is ranging around the new edition in the NeurIPS format, which asks to include broader research impact statements. And so the question goes something like, what are your opinions on having a broader impact research statement at the end of the paper? If we do that in robotics, is that going to be more added as an afterthought? And if that is the case, then how do we actually encourage people to carefully think about it more? And if not, then is research paper really the right place to do that, or should we leave it to proposals, grants, and things like that, where we actually engage government or policymakers?
Mustafa, I think that right now, even in proposals, the broader impacts are wildly outflated. How do we know what any fundamental science invention is really going to do? The diffusion of theory of innovation says it takes 20 years to pretty much find out what the real use was to settle out. And so this whole idea that we're supposed to say we're going to save the world, we're going to do this, and this technology will cure cancer, fix COVID, deliver everything, change the economy. I think it's asking a lot out of us as roboticists to be able to predict the future.
I agree with Robin, but you know, I think some sort of statement that explains the why that people are doing things would be really useful, because I don't think a lot of papers often capture that. It's very much about, you know, this is what I did and this is what I found, and not well why. So
but that's
I don't know
different
if it
than
helps
broader
that.
societal impact. I mean, you can say, hey, look, we saw this problem in teleoperation. We think that automation will work at, and now that will solve every possible problem in healthcare. Okay, no. You know, scoping it down. But I agree with you, Sue. We need more papers with better motivation.
I'm good. Those are well covered.
Dimitri, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, traditionally, I find the place for motivating your work is in the introduction section of a paper. And if I read an introduction and I'm like, how is this useful? I usually don't read the rest of the paper, right? So I don't know if explicitly putting in a statement of why this matters is really going to change anything. And I also think that you look at the experiments for some sense of impact as well, right? Like if the experiments is on a really simplified system that, you know, doesn't reflect real world constraints and assumptions, then again, you know, you're just shooting yourself in the foot already with writing that paper. Adding a statement, I don't think will change much.
Speaking
so
of
those are some really
experiment,
great points. Just to contextualize this discussion a little more, maybe you guys can also comment on you know, this idea of broader impact, but more in the case of sort of societal and ethical considerations, rather than sort of just kind of pure motivation about the work itself. Because I guess that was kind of the original intention for NeurIPS to add that broader impact statement.
I know. I think I'll just, you know, I think I'm in agreement with all the panelists, right? It's not the right venue. Paper is not the right place to put that. You don't have the context, and you're going to say stuff that you're going to regret later.
So I'm at Texas A&M. We have, and many of your universities have a school of government and policy as well. These are hard problems to figure out what is the right and ethical. And if you're doing anything with healthcare, they have their own panels and sets of this. If you're looking at engineering, process safety, as well as the legislative, you know, what are the policies, the aspirational, and it changes by culture. So I could say something, not that I would ever say anything controversial or offensive, and would be fine for the culture I work in, but not great for another country. So yeah, sometimes it's not always the place for it.
I think Nico had another question.
Yeah, in the previous panel, we talked quite a bit about experiment design and how to evaluate robot performance. And want to ask specifically Robin and Sue, who are interfacing with policymakers and end users in a very important domain. What do you think? How can we really prove to the end users or to the policymakers what the state of the robot technology is, and have clear designs or clear demonstrations of capabilities that are convincing for them as the target audience? What are your thoughts on that?
I'll jump in. I think, you know, I saw most of the previous panel, and you know, there had also been a question around the usefulness of competitions like the Amazon Picking Challenge and the DARPA challenges. And I actually think that they are a pretty good source of information for exactly that purpose. You know, because then you can say, well, you know, here are ways that these systems are being deployed and tested, and this is how, you know, various you know, teams are looking to solve the problem. I think that's very useful when we can do displays. But I mean, having said that, we also one of the challenges of COVID has been how to give people a good sense of what we do, because we have discovered how much we rely on people actually physically walking around and seeing what we do.
I think competitions are wonderful, but they're very focused on showing what, if you're familiar with NASA's technical readiness levels, they're showing whether that widget or particular thing is for that narrow set working. Okay, well, there's a whole nother set, and NASA's beginning to walk over to another metric called technical readiness assessment, which is not whether or not the widget works, okay, got the widget working, does it work in the larger ecosystem? Does it work for the mission? And we find time and time again in disaster robotics, a lot of robots that are being designed don't fit the work practices. They actually, David Woods and Eric Hallnagel, two famous cognitive engineers, have 2 books on how it doesn't, this substitution myth, there's hidden cost. So we found, like, one of the hurricanes, a group was so happy they had done it and they'd forgotten about batteries. So you don't need people except someone to change the batteries every 2 hours. Win-win? No, not so much. So that worked for a day and then it was discarded. So I think we need to look more at what are we trying to do. Now, competitions can help show a certain capability in a narrow range. Can we embed it? We see that with the Urban Grand Challenge was trying to be a bit more domain oriented, but understanding exactly what the end users need and being able to work with them, I think, is the bigger, is where you make the home run. The competitions get you in the door, but they don't finish it off.
Okay, I guess since we're pretty much out of time, if anyone has final thoughts, otherwise we can close out the panels. Great. If not, we all of us organizers want to thank Sid, Sue, Robin, and Dimitri for joining us for this session, and to all our speakers for all their amazing talks and all the panel discussions. And also to all the participants who tuned in into the live session. So hopefully you have a great RSS week, and thank you.
Thanks for doing this.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.